Quran is full of stories of mysterious events that happened in Arabia long before the religion of Islam was even revealed to the Arabs. Stories of mighty kingdoms that rose and fell, a dam that exploded and flooded the land, and an entire nation that was thrown into ditches of fire, burned for their beliefs. And while these events were all well known to the Arabs at that time, most of them remain a mystery today for even those who are now living in those very lands. But what exactly were these great events, and what did they have to do with the Jewish kingdom that once ruled Yemen, or the army of elephants that tried to destroy the Kaba? And what does all this have to do with a strange prophecy in the Bible that foretold the coming of a prophet to Arabia, even describing a specific lineage and location? In this video, I'll be exploring the answers to these questions and more as I tell you the entire story of Arabia before Islam. The documentary you're about to watch is based on the book that I'm writing called The Entire History of Islam. In this book, I will not only tell you, but I will show you the entire history of this ummah. From Ibrahim alayhi salam all the way into the modern era, and from the Muslim kingdoms of Italy and Greece and China to the obsession that the Japanese elite once had with Islam and with the Muslim world. And if you pre-order the book, I will literally write your name into the book, an honor for you, so that the world will know generations from now that it was you who supported this book from the very beginning. So go to my website now and pre-order the book, and may Allah grant your name a legacy the ummah will never forget. Ameen. Our story begins with the birth of Ibrahim alayhi salam in the lands of Babylon in modern-day Iraq, possibly in the 800s BCE, nearly 4,000 years ago. There he lived in a polytheistic society that worshipped idols and statues, as well as the three celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, and the planet Venus, a custom that even as a boy, Ibrahim alayhi salam hated. And so he set out to destroy those idols, showing his people that they were nothing but false gods, and to convince them to abandon this practice. So when his people were not around, he went to the idols and he smashed them to pieces, leaving only the biggest one, claiming that it was the one who had done it. But when his people returned, for a brief moment they realized how foolish they had been to worship these idols. And even though Ibrahim alayhi salam sarcastically claimed that he had seen the biggest idol smash all the rest, they knew this wasn't possible. And they began to argue amongst themselves, but eventually they all turned on him. He was tied up and taken to a huge pit of fire where they built it and burned it and then threw him in. But Allah commanded that the fire be cool and safe for Ibrahim alayhi salam. And so when the ropes burned off him, he simply walked out unharmed. But a miracle like this would not go unnoticed, and news of what had happened quickly spread throughout the kingdom. Soon the rumors made their way to the king himself, and he summoned Ibrahim alayhi salam, challenging him about his belief in Allah alone. The king claimed that he himself was God because he could kill and spare whoever he wanted, giving life and causing death. Ibrahim alayhi salam then tested him, asking him if he could make the sun rise not from the east, but from the west. And so the king was left speechless, having been utterly humiliated. And while we don't know what happened next, we do know that Allah soon saved him. He fled from his people, leaving the land of Iraq with his wife Sarah, traveling through Syria and even Egypt, before eventually settling in the land of Canaan in modern-day Palestine. Together they tried to have a child who could continue their legacy and spread the religion of Islam to the next generation. But Ibrahim alayhi salam was getting old and Sarah was barren, so they remained childless for many years. And while Sarah and Ibrahim alayhi salam would eventually be visited by angels who would give them the good and miraculous news of a child, Ishaq alayhi salam, at the time she did not know this. And so selflessly and graciously, she gifted Ibrahim alayhi salam her servant, Hagar, a young woman from Egypt. And with her, he had his first child, a boy he named Ismail alayhi salam. Here was Ibrahim's pride and joy, his firstborn son, and an heir to his legacy and his prophethood. But while Ismail was still an infant, Allah would soon try Ibrahim with an extremely difficult test, and he was told to take Ismail and his mother on a journey 1,000 kilometers to the south. And there he left them alone in a barren valley deep in the deserts of Arabia. Trusting in Allah, Hagar began running between two hills, Safa and Marwa, scanning the horizon for any signs of life. 5, 6, 7 times she ran between the hills, each time more and more frantic and desperate, until all of a sudden she saw someone, an angel, off in the distance. He was just standing there, digging his heel into the earth as if he was trying to get at something just beneath the surface. Then, all at once, the earth began to erupt and a gush of water burst out from the ground, gushing out from where he had been digging. Hagar quickly rushed to the source of the water and began shoveling sand around it to prevent it all from escaping. Little did she know that if she had just let the water flow, this gushing water would have become a stream flowing on the surface of the earth. And so this is how the well of Zamzam was discovered, and soon birds and other animals began to flock to the new source of water. But this sudden change in animal behavior didn't go unnoticed, and soon a number of shadowy figures began to appear along the peaks of the mountains surrounding the valley. It was now apparent that Hagar and Ismail alayhi salam were not alone after all. Long before Ibrahim alayhi salam made his way to Arabia, tribes originating from Yemen had already inhabited much of the peninsula. There, deep in the south, a man by the name of Ya'rub bin Qahtan, possibly a relative or a descendant of Hud alayhi salam from the now destroyed nation of Ad, became the father of the Qahtanites, also known as the pure Arabs or the al-Arab al-Ariba. And from him descended a number of mighty nations, vastly rich and powerful kingdoms that ruled the south for hundreds, even thousands of years, becoming masters of trade and engineering and producing some of the best sailors the world had ever seen. And from these kingdoms, a number of tribes began to migrate north, seeking new lands and new opportunities to explore. And 2 of these tribes eventually settled in the mountains of Bekka, having been unable to find a water supply in the valley below. And when all of a sudden they saw flocks of birds circling above in the sky, they knew something in the valley must have changed. They then went to go and look, and there they found a single person, a woman all alone, with a baby boy in her hands. And underneath her feet was a gushing well with enough water to sustain a new kingdom in the valley. The tribe of Jurhum were the first to find them, and they rushed down the mountains to greet Hagar and her child. They could have easily overpowered her or killed her and then taken the well for themselves, but instead they honored her, and they accepted her rights and her ownership over the well, and they asked her for permission to settle in the valley and to drink from its water. And she allowed them to, so long as they became her protectors and guardians of the valley. As Ismail alayhi salam grew up among the people of Jurhum, he eventually married into their tribe, and from that union, his 12 sons were born. These sons and their descendants would be known as the Adnanites, or the Arabized Arabs, a new lineage who were direct descendants of Ibrahim alayhi salam himself. And as the years went on, Ibrahim would periodically come to visit Ismail alayhi salam and his new family. And it was during these trips that 2 very important events took place in the valley of Bekka. The first of these was a test from Allah when he ordered Ibrahim to sacrifice Ismail, his firstborn son. Ibrahim and Ismail both complied, submitting themselves to Allah. And when Allah was satisfied with their actions, he sent down a ram or another animal to be sacrificed in Ismail's place. And from this, the tradition of sacrificing animals was born, a legacy that carries on until today. The second event, however, was the building of the Kaba together. This was a house in the valley of Bekka built for the purpose of worshipping Allah alone. But within the ayat of the Quran is a mystery, describing them raising the foundation of the house as if someone had built this house before. Some scholars have inferred from this that Adam alayhi salam, the first human alive, may have actually built the original Kaaba many ages before, and Allah knows best. Ibrahim then called upon all the people from all corners of the world to make their way there for Hajj. Never could he have known how far and wide the people would travel answering his call. But eventually Ibrahim passed away, and so too did Ismail. And for a while, the Kaaba and the valley of Bekka were left in the control of his 12 sons. But eventually Jurhum wrested authority from their hands and became the new leaders of Bekka. And the sons of Ismail were fragmented, with many leaving towards the lands of Jordan and Syria and even Egypt. But among those who stayed was the second son of Ismail alayhi salam, Kedar, a man who would later become the central figure in a biblical prophecy about the coming of a great and mighty nation. He was mentioned in chapter 42 in the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament, where it describes the coming prophet who will establish justice on earth and will live among the people of Kedar. Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. He will not falter or be discouraged till he establishes justice on earth. Let the wilderness and its towns raise their voices. Let the settlements where Kedar lives rejoice. Let the inhabitants of Sel'a sing. Let them shout from the top of the mountains. The book of Isaiah, chapter 42. And this prophecy later came true because among the descendants of Kedar was the tribe of the Quraysh, from which came the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the last and final messenger. And he would later make hijrah to the mountain of Sel'a, and he would stay there for the last 10 years of his life. But more on that later. With the tribe of Jurhum now in control of Becca, they became the new custodians of the well of Zamzam and the Kaaba. And while the people of Jurhum were initially on the religion of Ibrahim and Ismael alayhum as-salam, over time they became corrupt and decadent, and soon they began to lose their way. As other tribes and peoples from around Arabia had now begun to flock to the Kaaba for Hajj, Jurhum began to take their donations and the gifts meant for their upkeeping of the Kaaba, stealing their offerings and using them for their own desires. Soon enough, the sanctity of the Kaaba itself would be violated when a young couple by the name of Isaf and Naila fornicated inside the walls of the Kaaba. And legend has it that because of this egregious act, Allah petrified them, turning them into stone. When the people found them there the next morning, they placed them by the well of Zamzam as a warning to all. But over the next few generations, the purpose of these idols was forgotten, and the people began to worship them as the sanctity of the Kaaba continued to be violated even further. Having become fed up with all this corruption, two tribes that had been living in the outskirts of Becca began to plot a coup against Jurhum to free the Kaaba from their corruption. The first tribe was Khuzaa, who along with Jurhum had settled in the mountains of Becca during the time of Ismail alayhi salam, and the second tribe was Kinana, direct descendants of Ismail through Kedar. Together they launched an attack against Jurhum, overpowering and defeating them. And when it became clear to Jurhum that the battle had been lost, they quickly buried the well of Zamzam, hiding it from their enemies and removing all traces of it. And so the last of the rulers of Jurhum then fled back to Yemen, the land where their ancestors had come from so long ago. It was now the 100s CE, and nearly 2,000 years of Jurhum rule had ended. And while Kinana, the descendants of Ismail alayhi salam, had taken part in their defeat, the tribe of Khuzaa took power for themselves. But while they had initially fought against Jurhum because of their corruption, Khuzaa soon fell into corruption themselves. And it would be under their rule of Becca that idolatry as an institution would begin to take hold, and soon it would spread throughout the entire Arabian Peninsula. The story began with a man by the name of Amr ibn Luhay, a wealthy businessman from Khuzaa who often traveled to the lands of Syria. During one of his business trips there, he visited the Amalekites, the people which Jalut, the enemy of Dawood alayhi salam, had come from. There they worshipped an idol they called Hubal, saying that he was the one who brought them rain. Impressed by this, Amr brought Hubal back with him to Arabia, hoping and praying deep in the dry deserts of Arabia that this idol would bring them rain too. He then installed this idol in the Kaaba, and the pilgrims to the Kaaba began to pray to it. And soon they were manufacturing and carving these idols to sell to the people who came. Then came Al-Lat and Al-Uzza and Manat, the three goddesses whom the Arabs claimed were the daughters of Allah. These became new idols, new products to sell, and soon idol manufacturing became a huge business. Other tribes then tried to get in on the action, introducing their own idols and even building shrines in their own cities dedicated to these false gods. This was their attempt to compete with the Kaaba and with the idols in Becca, trying to bring pilgrims to their cities to do business with them. Before long, the entire peninsula was flooded with idols, building a huge economy of buying and selling and fabricating false gods. Many of these idols were statues of great honorable men who had long passed away, while others were taken from surrounding empires, gods of the Egyptians and Romans and Greeks. And while the Arabs always claimed that it was Allah alone who was the creator of this world and everything in it. Their idols became the main focus of their worship, and the religion of Ibrahim and Ismael alayhum salam was all but completely forgotten. During the rise of Khuzaa and their introduction to idols, a number of great chaotic events were taking place in the lands to the north that would forever change the course of the history of the Arabian Peninsula. At the time, the people of Bani Israel was still living in the kingdom of Judea, and Allah had already raised Isa alayhi salam to himself and taken him from this earth. Soon after this, Bani Israel led a number of uprisings against the Roman Empire, the greatest of which was the Bar Kokhba rebellion in 132 CE. In this rebellion, Bani Israel managed to actually defeat one of the Roman armies in battle, completely humiliating the empire. So the Emperor of Rome then gathered a third of all the soldiers in the entire Roman Empire, and they went in and massacred Bani Israel. Over 500,000 people died in retaliation, and the waves of refugees began fleeing to the neighboring lands, searching for new homes and a new chance at life. These people were called Jews as they came from the kingdom of Judea, and many of them made their way down to the Arabian Peninsula. Some of them reached as far as the southern corner of Yemen, while others settled along the mountain of Sela, not far north from Becca, the very same mountain that was mentioned in the prophecy of Kedar. The Jews were waiting for the arrival of the next prophet. There, the Jewish tribes of Banu Nadir, Banu Qurayza, and Banu Qaynuqa founded the city of Yathrib. And from there, they established orchards, farmland, and fortresses. They also built a marketplace and a rest stop for the Arabs who were on their way to do trade with the Romans in the north. And while it quickly became an important trading hub along the trade routes of Arabia, Yathrib would soon become known for so much more, because only a few hundred years later, the prophet that they were waiting for would arrive in that city. But what they hadn't realized at that time was that this final prophet wouldn't come from the lineage of Ishaq and Yaqub. This time, the prophet would instead come from Bani Ismael. The documentary that you're watching was taken from a book that I'm writing called The Entire History of Islam. And the reason I'm writing it is because we are a nation that has completely forgotten its history. We don't know about the Muslim king of Cambodia who tried to bring Islam to his people and was ultimately assassinated. We don't know about the brave Muslims of Al-Andalus who fought off the Viking invasions. But this is our history, and our history is our identity. And so to forget the history of this ummah is to lose who we are as Muslims and to forget where we came from. How will you pass on Islam to your children when they have no way to learn their history? Rather, you risk them finding a new identity, a non-Islamic identity, and you may end up being the last Muslim in your lineage. This is why I'm writing this book. So go to my website now and pre-order the book. And if you pre-order, I will literally write your name into the book so that future generations know and recognize that it was you who was the reason that this book could even exist in the first place. May Allah give your name a legacy that the ummah will never forget. Ameen. The lands of Yemen were home to a number of mighty nations, huge kingdoms that developed and grew long before Ibrahim alayhi salam was born. There were sailors, traders, and masters of engineering. They were technologically advanced and extremely influential, and their economies rivaled those of the surrounding empires. The kingdom of Saba was the largest and most powerful of these, having built a huge dam in their capital city. It allowed them to capture water and irrigate the soil, creating a vast fertile oasis out of the dry desert lands. This was the mighty kingdom that the bird Hudhud told Sulaiman alayhi salam about in Surah An-Naml. He then invited their queen Bilqis to come visit him in his own kingdom, where he then invited her and her people to stop worshipping the sun, but instead to worship Allah alone as Muslims. But around the year 145, disaster struck when all of a sudden the dam of Ma'rib exploded and the water burst out, destroying all their crops and farmland. The effect of this explosion was devastating, and soon the kingdom of Saba weakened and crumbled, and the entire region was dragged into economic ruin. Many tribes then began to migrate out of Yemen, no longer able to make a living for themselves. And of these tribes, the two most important were Aus and Khazraj, who would then settle in the lands of Yathrib, along with the Jewish tribes living there. These tribes would play a very important role in the coming of the new prophet hundreds of years later. But for the time being, another important and very strange event took place in Yathrib, one that would prepare the people of Arabia for his future arrival. After the destruction of the Dam and Ma'rib and the collapse of the kingdom of Saba, the Himyarites became the new dominant power, swallowing up the old lands of Saba and the surrounding territories. Soon, the entirety of Yemen was taken, but it wasn't enough. So they continued their expansion, conquering all of the tribes in the north. Legend has it that around the year 400, King Abu Kirab As'ad al-Kamil and his Himyarite army arrived in the city of Yathrib. There he took over the city, leaving behind one of his sons to rule. But when Abu Kirab and his army continued on their journey north, the people of Yathrib killed the new governor, and Abu Kirab was forced to return. Soon he arrived back at the gates of Yathrib, cutting down all the palm trees and putting the town under siege. But just as all hope for Yathrib had come to an end, Abu Kirab suddenly fell ill, and none of his doctors were able to cure him. Hearing about the king and his condition, two rabbis from the people of Yathrib offered themselves to the Himyarites, saying they could help him, risking their lives. They had studied medicine and they knew how to cure him. And as they were attending to his needs, they spoke to him about the religion, and they managed to convince him to leave his paganism behind. Abu Kirab then followed them, choosing to worship the God of Ibrahim and Ismael and Ishaq alayhum as-salam alone. He abandoned the worship of idols and false gods and the sun. And when he was cured of his disease, he went out to the army and he convinced them to do the same as well. Those two rabbis then traveled back with him to Yemen, and there they remained teaching his people the laws of Musa alayhi salam and the stories of the prophets of Allah. Because of these two rabbis, the entire nation of Himyar became a Jewish nation, the Muslims of their time. But from among them would later come a tyrant whose oppression would lead to the destruction of Yemen. And soon after that, the events preceding the arrival of the coming prophet would begin. Back in the city of Becca, most of the descendants of Ismail alayhi salam had left the city, disgusted with how the tribe of Khuzaa had violated the sanctity of the Kaba and installed idols in it. But among the last of Ismail's descendants to remain in the city was a man by the name of Fihr ibn Malik, who was later given the nickname Quraysh. Over the next few generations, his sons and grandsons would grow steadily, gaining strength in their numbers. But it was only after 6 generations of the tribe of Quraysh that the children of Ismail alayhi salam finally managed to regain control of the Kaaba. In the year 400, around the same time that Himyar had converted to Judaism, Qusay ibn Kilab was born. His father had died at an early age, and he was adopted by a merchant from Syria. He was taken there and he was raised and grew up, eventually coming back to Becca as an adult. This upbringing in Syria gave Qusay an enormous advantage because he brought with him skills in administration and leadership and commerce. The leadership of Khuzaa soon took a liking to him, and he was allowed to marry from among them the daughter of one of the chieftains of Khuzaa. Now the tribes of Khuzaa and Quraysh were linked through marriage, giving them privilege above others. And when the chieftain of Khuzaa eventually died, Qusay managed to take ownership of the keys to the Kaaba. And with the keys in his hand and the tribe of Khuzaa now leaderless, Qusay usurped their throne, becoming the king of Becca and bringing the Quraysh to power. It was now the year 440, over 2,000 years since the descendants of Ismail alayhi salam had lost the keys to the Kaaba. But now the Quraysh had taken them back, restoring them to the rightful owners. And while the Quraysh were now unified and in control of Becca, this wouldn't last long. Soon, a fierce rivalry would split the tribe in two and threaten to break them apart. It was now the year 480, and by then the name Mecca was beginning to come more and more into use. Qusay was now lying on his deathbed, and in a final act as king, he chose his eldest son, Abdullah, to succeed him as leader of the Quraysh and ruler of Mecca. But this caused tension within the Quraysh, as Qusay's second son, Abd Manaf, was seen as a much better leader, excelling in diplomacy and business, and many people would have preferred to see him as king instead. There was now a split in the Quraysh between the house of Abd-ad-Dar and the house of Abd Manaf, and each side's supporters, and before long hostilities broke out with the two factions at each other's throats. The supporters of Abd Manaf met at the Kaaba and dipped their hands into a bucket of perfume, wiping them on the walls of the Kaaba as a symbol of their oath to each other. The supporters of Abd-ad-Dar then did the same, this time dipping their hands into a bucket of blood as an act of provocation. Tensions were now rising, weapons were being raised, and it seemed as if a civil war was about to break out. But in the final moments, a deal was made, and the two parties agreed to a power-sharing scheme. The house of Abd-ad-Dar would remain the leaders of Mecca, commanding the army of the Quraysh and keeping their guardianship over the Kaaba. And in return, the house of Abd Manaf would be given the honor and responsibility of feeding the pilgrims and giving them water. This was the compromise they made, with both sides agreeing to the deal. And while a civil war had been averted for the time being, this split in the rulership of Mecca would remain, haunting the Quraysh for generations to come. Hashim was the eldest son of Abd al-Manaf, and soon he became the man responsible for the pilgrims. He quickly became famous for his extreme generosity, with the title of Hashim meaning the one who grinds, being given to him because he would personally spend his time grinding barley to make into a soup for the pilgrims to eat. But while he was responsible for the pilgrims, he realized that the entire economy of Mecca was almost fully dependent on the pilgrimage industry. Understanding that this was unsustainable, he gathered his brothers and soon set off on one of the greatest diplomatic missions ever in Arabia. His plan was to visit the surrounding tribes and nations and make a deal with each of them, creating a new trade route through the heart of Arabia with Mecca at its center. This would bring a new source of wealth and trade to Mecca, acting as a safety net by diversifying the city's economy. And so Hashim and his three brothers set off towards the surrounding major empires. On the way there, they met with leaders of Arab tribes in all directions, offering them shares in the profits of each caravan that passed through their land in exchange for their protection. With these guarantees of safety now in hand, the four brothers set off to negotiate a trade agreement with each of the major empires. Hashim then went to the Romans in the north, while his twin brother Abd al-Shams went to the Ethiopians in the south. The two younger brothers, al-Muttalib and Nawfal, soon followed suit, negotiating deals with the king of Himyar. Arabia was at the center of these major empires, a neutral territory that was in the perfect position to become a trading hub. But these empires knew that it was a lawless land, with bandits and highway robbers patrolling the main roads. So when these brothers came there with a guarantee of safety, each of the empires agreed to their terms. And the four brothers were able to negotiate the removal of all taxes and tariffs from their goods, an agreement exclusive to the caravans of Mecca, giving them an advantage over their competition. This new trade route would be known as the Caravan of the Winter and Summer, with merchants heading south to Yemen and Ethiopia in the winter, and north to Syria and the Levant in the summer. It was so revolutionary and brought so much prosperity and security to the people of Mecca that Allah even mentioned it in the Quran. Hashim's reputation was now soaring, and before long he would become a legend among the people of Arabia. But soon something else would happen to the people of Mecca, as a treasure that had been lost to them for centuries would finally be discovered and brought out from beneath the ground. There's a misconception that the history of Islam is limited to the Middle East, and yet today we find that the vast majority of the ummah comes from places elsewhere. This is one of the reasons I'm writing this book, The Entire History of Islam. And in fact, it was the original reason why I started this channel in the first place, half a decade ago. It was to highlight the amazing stories of Muslim heroes and nations throughout the entire history of our ummah. In this book, I've dedicated entire chapters to some of the more unknown regions with immensely rich Muslim history. I have an entire chapter on India and another one on China. I have a chapter on East Africa and another on West Africa. And of course, I have a chapter in Southeast Asia, where the largest Muslim populations live today. And I have an entire chapter on Al-Andalus as well, one of the greatest chapters in the history of our ummah. But these are only a few of the 18 or so chapters that have been planned for this book, covering everything from Ibrahim alayhi salam, the entire history of Bani Israel, the entire history of Bani Ismael as well, all the way to the colonization of the Muslims and to the events that led to their independence and up into the modern era today. And of course, we have an entire section on Palestine as well, inshallah. So go to my website and pre-order the book now. And if you pre-ordered, I will literally write your name into the book so that future generations know and recognize that it was you who was the reason that this book could even exist in the first place. May Allah give your name a legacy that the ummah will never forget. Ameen. During one of Hashem's business trips to Syria as part of the winter and summer caravan, he stopped by Yathrib a little to the north and found a woman there who charmed and captivated him. Asking the family for her hand in marriage, the two were soon wed, and before long, Hashem's new wife became pregnant. Hashem then carried on with his mission, leaving his new wife, waiting for him to return. But that return never came, as he suddenly fell ill on the journey and unexpectedly passed away. This child of his was eventually born in the city of Yathrib and was given the name Sheba. And when 7 or 8 years had passed, the child was now playing in the streets. A merchant from Mecca passed by him and saw him. Now Sheba looked like his father, and he boasted to the other children about how he was Hashem's son, master of the valleys. And so when this merchant went back to Mecca, he told Hashem's younger brother, al-Muttalib, about what he had seen. Al-Muttalib quickly left for Yathrib in search of this boy. And when he found him, he brought him back to Mecca, where they then called the boy Abdul-Muttalib, not realizing that this was Muttalib's own nephew, rather assuming he was Muttalib's new slave. This would be the name he carried for the rest of his life. As Abdul-Muttalib grew older, 2 of his uncles, al-Muttalib and Abd al-Shams, soon passed away. And this left only Nawfal alive as the last of the 4 brothers. Abdul Muttalib then became of age to inherit from his father Hashim, and he became the new leader of the pilgrims. But Nawfal wanted the position for himself, and so he usurped his throne, taking all of his inheritance as well. Now Abdul Muttalib was left alone and isolated, as no one wanted to support him and cause another civil war. So he wrote a letter to his maternal uncle back in Yathrib, who came all the way to Mecca with an army of 80 men, demanding that Nawfal return the inheritance to Abdul Muttalib. Nawfal reluctantly agreed, and Abdul Muttalib took Hashem's throne. Abdul Muttalib became known as a proper successor to Hashim, matching him in his skills and righteousness and generosity. But unlike Hashim and even Qusay before him, Abdul Muttalib was not wealthy and did not have many sons. In fact, he only had one, al-Harith, to support him. And because of this, he carried out his duties with his own hands, even as he was approaching old age. But soon, something would happen to Abdul Muttalib that would bring him wealth and status beyond any other Qurayshi before him. He began having a strange dream each night. And in this dream, a voice told him to dig in front of the Kaba. It said that beneath the earth was something precious, something that had been lost to the people of Mecca for hundreds of years. Soon after many nights of seeing the same dream, he went with his son in search of the place to dig. It was between the 2 statues of Isaf and Na'ila, the cursed couple who had fornicated inside the walls of the Kaaba. When they began to dig, the people protested, saying that they were desecrating the sanctity of the Kaaba and these statues. But Abdul Muttalib ignored them and continued his digging until eventually he struck something and water began to flow from the soil. After hundreds of years, the well of Zamzam had finally been uncovered. This was a monumental event for the Quraysh. The city of Mecca now had a stable water supply, and there was plenty of it. And because Abdul Muttalib was the one to discover it, the well became his property. And if he died now, his son Al-Harith would inherit it from him. But there was a problem. Abdul Muttalib and Al-Harith both belonged to the house of Abdul Manaf, but they were still sharing power with the house of Abd al-Dar. And they knew that because Al-Harith was the only son in his family, the other house would eventually overpower him and take the well of Zamzam for themselves. So Abdul Muttalib made a promise to Allah that if he granted him 10 sons and they all grew up to manhood, he would sacrifice one of them at the Kaaba. And soon enough, Allah would grant him those 10 sons and he would have to fulfill his vow. Over the next few years, from his 6 wives, 9 more sons were born. And as each one of them grew into adulthood, the day of the sacrifice drew closer and closer. Abdullah was the youngest of his sons and his favorite as well. But when he finally came of age, al-Muttalib gathered them all and went to the Kaba and told them about the oath that he had made with Allah. They each took an arrow and wrote their name on it, entering the Kaba and presenting them to their chief idol, Hubal. A priest who was stationed there to guard the idol took the arrows and began the ritual. He drew lots with the arrows, and each time the same name was selected. Again and again the priest drew, and again it was Abdullah who was chosen. Fate had been decided, and there was nothing al-Muttalib could do. So he took his favorite son, Abdullah, and he presented him before the statues of Isaf and Na'ilah, and there he raised the sword above his neck, preparing for the human sacrifice. But the people of the town shouted at him and begged him to stop. They suggested that he should visit the sorceress, Najah, who lived just outside the city. He visited her and brought her to the Kaaba and explained the oath he had given. So she took the arrow with Abdullah's name on it and began casting lots. Each time she threw the arrow and it pointed at Abdullah, she said 10 camels would be sacrificed instead of him. 10 times it landed, each time pointing at him, until on the 11th time it finally pointed away. Abdullah's life could now be ransomed for the price of 100 camels, each to be slaughtered in his place. That day they held a monumental feast, and word of this event spread across Arabia. Abdul-Muttalib had become an almost legendary figure for this great feast and for his discovery of the well of Zamzam. But Abdullah, on the other hand, was known as the one whose life was redeemed by Allah and for whose honor 100 camels were sacrificed. But even though a small fortune had been paid to purchase those camels and to keep Abdullah alive, no one can escape death. And for him, it came quickly when he was only 25 years old. He had just gotten married and didn't even know that his wife was now pregnant. But soon after their wedding, he joined the summer caravan to Syria, and on his way there, he suddenly fell ill and died. He never got to meet his son, nor did he even know that he existed, and little could he have known just who exactly his son would end up becoming. But as the time of this child's birth grew closer and closer, a number of very strange and even miraculous events occurred, preparing the people of Mecca for his arrival. Every 10 years or so, a new ideology comes to attack Islam, whether it's liberalism or feminism or capitalism, communism, consumerism, scientism, secularism, individualism, or even, of course, the promotion of sexual perversions with ideologies such as the LGBT movement. And so in this book I'm writing called The Entire History of Islam, I have a chapter dedicated to the colonization of the Muslim world by Western powers. But it wasn't just the physical colonization through military might or the enslavement to the banks through debt traps, but there was also a colonization of the mind of the Muslims through the use of all of these ideologies that take our children away from Islam. So in this book, I will explain how each of these ideologies came about, and I will respond to each of them with the Islamic stance on them and how Islam differs in its lifestyle. So for example, when I'm talking about capitalism and communism, I have a whole explanation on how the Islamic economy works. Or when I'm talking about feminism, I give an explanation of the roles of men and women according to Islam and how authority within the marriage contract works. So go to my website now and pre-order the book. And if you pre-order during this Ramadan, I will literally write your name into this book, an honor for you, because you are one of the very first people to support this project. Something special for the people who pre-ordered this book during this Ramadan only. When Rome was sacked in the year 70 and the Second Temple was destroyed, the followers of Isa and his brother James lost their positions of authority and were no longer able to preach his message. The religion they were on would later be called Jamesonian Christianity. And in the wake of their absence, the followers of Paul were able to continue preaching, telling the people that Isa had been crucified and resurrected, and that he was the Son of God on earth, and that he died for the sins of humanity. This religion would be called Pauline Christianity. Soon, Pauline Christianity spread across the Roman Empire, developing, evolving, and mixing with Greek and Roman philosophy. Over the next few centuries, new ideas were introduced, and eventually the concept of Trinity was invented. The Romans even began exporting Pauline Christianity to Arabia when, in the year 354, the emperor sent a man called Theophilus the Indian to the southern lands of Yemen. There, he established 3 churches and began preaching Trinitarian Christianity to the people of Himyar. And even though they Himyarite Empire was mostly Jewish at the time, many of those people converted. But it wasn't just the Romans. Even the Ethiopians began converting too. A young Christian boy from modern-day Lebanon was traveling on a ship with his brother. Eventually, their ship was hijacked by pirates, and the two boys were sold into slavery. From there, they made their way to Ethiopia, where they were bought by Ezana, the king of Aksum. And in the year 340, the Christian boy managed to convince Ezana of his religion, converting him to Christianity. Ezana was now the first Christian king of Aksum, and soon the entire land of Ethiopia converted to Christianity with him. And while Pauline Christianity was now spreading rapidly in the empires surrounding Arabia, there were still a few Jamesonian Christian communities as well. These true followers of Isa alayhi salam were known as the Ebionites, and they rejected the Trinity, believing in Isa alayhi salam as merely a prophet of Allah. But in order to avoid persecution by the Romans, they were forced to live in isolated places, often hiding in the mountains or the deserts. And one of those communities lived in the land of Najran. But soon they found that the persecutions would even reach them there too. In the year 522, a Jewish king by the name of Dhu Nuwas took the throne of the Himyarite Empire. This king had a court magician who was growing old, so he sent for a young boy to become his student and learn from him so that he would become his successor. The boy's name was Abdullah ibn Thamir, and soon enough he began training under the magician. But as he went to the magician each day, he passed by an old Christian monk, a man named Phemion, who had originally come from Syria. Eventually, Abdullah began to sit with Phemion each morning and listen to him speak. And soon he became torn between the monk and the magician, not knowing which path in life to choose. One day, a huge animal entered the city, preventing the people from passing. Abdullah took a stone and made a dua saying, "Oh Allah, if the affair of the monk is dearer to you than that of the magician, cause death to this animal so that the people may pass freely." He then threw the stone and killed the beast. And when he went to Phemion and told him what happened, Phemion then said, "Today you are superior to me. Your affair has come to a stage where I find that you would soon be put to a trial." Soon the boy began to experience miracles, curing the blind and those suffering from leprosy. But when the king Dhu Nuwas heard about all this, he was amazed, thinking all of this was the work of magic. But Abdullah told him and the people, "I do not cure anyone. It is Allah who cures. If you believe in Allah, I will pray and He will cure you." Dhu Nuwas then tortured him, asserting that he was the only Lord, fearing that he may lose his authority over the people if they began worshipping Allah instead of him. He later found out about Phemion the monk and had him brought in and then cut him in half with a saw. The king then told his men to take Abdullah up to the mountain and throw him off of it if he did not renounce his religion. So Abdullah made a dua asking Allah to save him. The mountain then shook and the king's men fell off, and Abdullah returned to the king unharmed. The king then sent another group of men to take Abdullah out to sea and drown him if he did not renounce his religion. Again, Abdullah made dua asking Allah to save him. The boat capsized, the men drowned, and Abdullah returned to the king once more. Abdullah then told Dhu Nuwas, "You cannot kill me unless you do what I ask. Gather all the people in a field, hang me from the trunk of a tree, and take an arrow out of my quiver and say, 'In the name of Allah, the Lord of the boy,' then shoot me. If you do that, you will be able to kill me." The king did exactly that, and when the boy was struck in the head with the arrow, he put his hands up where it hit him, and suddenly he died. The people then exclaimed, "We believe in the Lord of the boy. We believe in the Lord of the boy. We believe in the Lord of the boy." One of the king's men then remarked, "See, Allah has accomplished what you wanted to prevent. The people have believed." So Dhu Nuwas ordered ditches to be dug and fires to be lit in them. He turned to the people and said, "Whoever does not turn away from his religion will be thrown into the fire or told to jump in." But the people defied him and did not renounce their religion, so they were all pushed in. And when a mother came with her child, she hesitated to jump in, but her child spoke to her saying, "Mother, be patient, for you are on the truth." The details of this story are mentioned in an authentic hadith in Sahih Muslim and are referenced in the Quran in Surah Buruj. News of the ditches of fire and the persecution of Christians in Najran soon reached the Roman emperor. And in the year 525, he personally wrote a letter to Caleb, the Christian king of Aksum, asking for his help in avenging their deaths and defending the rest of the Christians. Caleb then responded by gathering an army of over 70,000 men and sending them across the Red Sea, beginning the Aksumite invasion of Himyar. Under the command of one of his generals, the army managed to conquer the Himyarites and defeat their forces. Soon, Duwas was chased into the Red Sea, where he drowned while trying to escape. The kingdom of Himyar was now under the control of the Aksumite Empire, and the general who had conquered it was now made its governor. But among the top-ranking soldiers was a man by the name of Abraha, and Abraha soon gathered support and usurped the throne, becoming the new ruler of Himyar instead. Now a rift grew between Caleb and Aksum and Abraha and Himyar, but Abraha began construction on al-Qullais, a huge cathedral in Caleb's honor, and through this gesture, he was able to placate him. But the real motive behind Abraha's grand cathedral was to rival the Kaba in Mecca and make Yemen the main site of pilgrimage in Arabia. Abraha had now earned the ire of both pagans and the Jews, as his cathedral was an affront to both of their religions. So a man from one of the local tribes traveled to Yemen, entered the church, and defecated inside it. When Abraha heard about this, he gathered an army of some 60,000 men plotting to destroy the Kaaba. And with that army were 11 war elephants, huge, towering beasts, the likes of which the Arabs had never seen. It was now the year 570, and Abraha and his army set off for Mecca with a single-minded purpose of destroying the Kaaba. Along the way, they crushed every form of resistance, tribe after tribe, family after family. The people of Arabia grew frantic and desperate. The situation was dire. All hope seemed to have been lost. This was the Kaaba, the house of Allah, the place that people from all around traveled hundreds of miles to worship Him. And now the armies of Abraha had come, unparalleled in their strength, invincible, with huge, horrifying beasts in their ranks, terrifying the people. Soon his army reached the outskirts of Mecca, and the people of Mecca fled to the mountains. But as the army approached the walls of the city, Abraha's personal elephant sat down and refused to move. Then the clouds gathered all around them as the sky grew darker and darker, and a violent wind roared through their ranks. From above they heard a terrifying noise. A huge flock of birds blotted out the sky, and they began pelting the army with heavy black stones, ripping through their flesh and bone, bludgeoning their faces into unrecognizable pulp. The army of Abraha was annihilated, and the Kaaba itself was saved. Although Abraha himself survived the incident and made his way back to Yemen, he was a destroyed man, a shell of his former self, with barely the strength to move. Before long, his chest cracked and his heart exploded, and that was the end of him. But now there was a power vacuum in the region, and fearing that the Aksumites would try to reconquer Yemen, the Persians decided to invade first. With Abraha now dead and much of his army destroyed, they were able to quickly conquer Yemen and occupy the land, and soon they installed an Arab governor who was loyal to them and left him in charge. Most of the Aksumites at this point had left Yemen and returned to Ethiopia, but some had stayed behind, and among those men, a few conspired together and assassinated the Arab governor, threatening another invasion by Aksum. The Persians then invaded Yemen for a second time, this time occupying it permanently, and there the Persians would remain rulers of Yemen for the next 50 years. After Abraha's army had been defeated in Mecca, the people came down from the mountains and returned to their homes. Soon after, a caravan appeared on the horizon, just coming back from its summer journey to Syria. But as the dust settled and all the merchants from the caravan dismounted, al-Muttalib was left waiting for his son, Abdullah, who was nowhere to be seen. Soon he learned the news that Abdullah had died on the trip, and he went to his widow, and together they grieved. Before long, Abdullah's widow gave birth to a child, a son that Abdullah would never know. And so, in his stead, al-Muttalib resolved to raise him and care for him and to protect him, a grandchild from his favorite son, whom he had spent a fortune to save, but who was now gone. But with this new child, he was filled with hope. He hoped that the boy would become a leader for his people, and he hoped that he would succeed him as chieftain of the Quraysh, and he hoped that Allah would praise him in the heavens and the people would praise him upon the earth. And so he named him the one who is much praised, the praiseworthy, from the Arabic word Muhammad. When the tribes of Aus and Khazraj settled in Yathrib, the Jewish tribes of Banu Nadir, Banu Qurayza, and Banu Qaynuqa had long since established themselves in the city. There, they established marketplaces and built fortresses for themselves to live in, and they would give out interest-bearing loans to the Arabs, giving them money now to be repaid during future harvests. They became the financiers and the landowners and the manufacturers and the sellers of weapons. And to maintain control over the city, they constantly sowed seeds of hatred between Aus and Khazraj, backing both sides whenever a war broke out between them. The latest of these conflicts lasted over a decade, ending with Yawm al-Bu'ath, the single bloodiest day in the history of Yathrib. Aus allied themselves with the Jewish tribes of Banu Nadir and Banu Qurayza, while Khazraj on the other side was supported by the Jewish tribe of Banu Qaynuqa. That day, nearly all of the chieftains and tribal leaders of both Aus and Khazraj were killed in the battle, leaving behind the younger generations. And they were hungry for change. These were the youth that eventually met the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam during the trip to Mecca for Hajj. And these were the youth who invited the Prophet to come to their city of Yathrib and to rule over their tribes of Aus and Khazraj, promising to protect them from all of his enemies and to preserve the message of Islam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam then accepted their invitation and he made hijrah to the city of Yathrib. And when he finally arrived, he united the Aus and Khazraj under one banner, calling them the Ansar, meaning the helpers. And to symbolize a new beginning for the people of Yathrib, the name of the city itself was also changed and given a new name, the Illuminated City, or as it's known in Arabic, al-Medina al-Munawwara, or just Medina for short. The script of this video was based on one of the chapters of my new upcoming book, The Entire History of Islam. An absolutely massive book dedicated to telling the entire story of our ummah. From the lost Muslim kingdoms of Spain and France to the great sultanates of Vietnam and the Philippines and Russia. This is our entire history, a compilation that has never been done before in the entire history of our ummah. This is the most important book of this generation. So go to my website now and pre-order the book. And if you pre-order the book, I will literally write your name into the book as an honor for you, so that generations from now, people will read this book and know that it was you. You were the reason that this book could even be printed in the first place. So go to my website and pre-order now. And may Allah accept you as a co-author to the most important book of our generation. Ameen.